Homeless at 22, I thought my life had hit rock bottom, until I discovered a hidden world beneath a hill. What I found there changed my life forever and nearly cost me everything. Hey everyone! Before we dive in, make sure you're part of our YouTube family by hitting that subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Alright, let's jump straight into the story. I was 22 years old and had nowhere to go. The city felt too big and too cold for someone like me. Every morning I woke with a sore back and scraped hands, wondering how I would survive the day. Nights were the worst. Sleeping on hard benches or under abandoned staircases left me stiff and shivering. I had no money, no family, and no friends who could help. The world seemed to move on without noticing me. One afternoon, I wandered farther than usual, beyond the part of town I had seen 100 times. I stumbled across a hill that looked out of place. The soil was uneven, and some parts of the grass were flattened, as if something heavy had been buried beneath. My curiosity got the better of me. I knelt and pressed my hands against the dirt. It felt hollow. My heart started beating faster. Could something really be hidden under this hill? Nearby, I noticed a rusty metal rod half buried in the soil. It was not much, but it was enough to start digging. I gripped it tightly and began scraping away the top layer of dirt. The first hits were rough. Rocks cut my hands, dust filled my nose, and the dry soil made the work slow. My arms ached and my knees protested from kneeling on the ground for hours. Still, I kept going. I had nothing to lose, and this hill felt like a secret waiting to be discovered. Hours passed. My clothes were covered in dust, my hands were sore, and my muscles burned with fatigue. Then I felt a hard surface under the soil. Metal. My heart jumped. Carefully, I cleared the remaining dirt. Slowly, a curved shape began to emerge. It was old, rusty, and hidden so well that it had probably gone unnoticed for decades. I realized it was a Quonset hut buried under the hill. The door was almost completely buried, but I pushed with all my strength. It creaked loudly as it moved, releasing a puff of stale, dusty air. Inside, the hut was dark, quiet, and surprisingly spacious. My footsteps made soft echoes as I stepped in. The floor was covered in dust and small debris, but it was dry. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. I had found a place that could be mine, at least for now. I dragged in some crates I found nearby and spread out my blankets. Using broken shelves and wooden planks, I created a small sleeping area and a corner to store my few belongings, a worn backpack, a tin cup, and a notebook. The hut smelled strongly of rust and old wood, but that didn't matter. Safety mattered more than smell. I sat on the floor and let out a long breath. "I can make this work," I whispered. A spark of hope stirred inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep easily. Every creak of the hut made me tense. I imagined someone discovering the place or the roof collapsing while I slept. I reminded myself of all the difficult nights I had endured on the streets. If I had survived that, I could survive this. Slowly, fatigue overcame my fear and I drifted into a light sleep. The next morning, the hut was still standing, quiet and solid. My determination grew. I wanted to explore every corner and understand the secrets this place might hold. The following day, I examined the hut more carefully. Every wall, every floorboard, and every corner seemed to have its own story. I lifted old crates, tapped on the walls, and peeked into shadowed corners. That's when I found a small wooden crate hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were unusual items: tiny gears, glass vials, small wheels, and pieces of metal shaped like parts of a machine. I had no idea what they were for, but my curiosity flared. I spent hours turning each piece over in my hands, imagining how they could fit together. Some were delicate, others heavy. Some had scratches, showing they had been used repeatedly. I realized that whoever had placed these items here had meant for someone to find them, to figure out their purpose. That thought thrilled me. This hut was not just a shelter. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. I began experimenting. I tried connecting gears, spinning small wheels, and moving levers. Most attempts failed. Sometimes pieces flew across the floor with a loud clang. Each failure frustrated me, but I didn't give up. Slowly, a lever clicked and a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a jar of clean water. My heart raced. A small wheel, when spun correctly, caused a shelf to slide out, revealing empty containers I could use. Each discovery made me more confident. Days passed like this. I scavenged old cans, jars, and broken tools from the streets and incorporated them into the hut. I cleaned corners, swept away dust, and arranged crates and shelves more efficiently. I discovered that the hut had a rhythm to it. Every gear, every lever, Every hidden section seemed designed for someone to survive alone, and slowly I began to understand it. By the end of the first week, I wasn't just surviving, I was learning. I learned how to repair broken parts, balance levers, and use the hidden compartments for water and storage. The hut had become more than a safe place to sleep. It had become a teacher. Each new day brought challenges, but also solutions. My confidence grew, and with it, hope. The hut was no longer just a building. It was my home, a puzzle, and a teacher. I discovered that patience, observation, and careful thinking were as important as food or shelter. I had begun to feel that maybe, just maybe, this place could change my life. I didn't just have a hut. I had a world full of mysteries waiting for me to solve. The following morning, I woke up feeling a strange mix of excitement and curiosity. The hut had become more than a shelter. It felt like a secret waiting to be explored further. I decided to examine every corner and floorboard to see what other surprises it might hold. I moved crates aside carefully, listening to the soft echoes of my footsteps on the metal floor. Everything in the hut seemed old yet purposeful. Nothing appeared random. Under a loose plank near the far corner, I discovered a hidden compartment. Sliding it open revealed another small crate filled with mechanical parts. Tiny gears, metal springs, broken levers, and small jars containing powders of unknown color. I ran my fingers over the pieces, imagining what they could do. I had never worked with mechanical objects before, but I felt a spark of determination. If the hut was built this way for a reason, I wanted to learn its secrets. I spent hours experimenting with the pieces. I arranged the gears in different combinations, attached levers to pulleys, and tested every connection I could think of. Most attempts failed. Some wheels spun freely but did nothing. A few levers slipped out of my hands and clattered onto the floor. Frustration crept in, but I refused to give up. Slowly, I began to notice patterns. The gears clicked in certain sequences. Some levers only worked when a particular wheel turned first, and certain compartments responded to precise movements. On the third day of experimenting, I accidentally triggered a sequence that surprised me. A hidden shelf slid out from the wall, revealing several empty jars. I realized these were storage compartments designed for long-term use. With careful observation, I discovered that every corner of the hut contained hidden features that could be used for survival. A small compartment held a pile of clean cloths I had not noticed before. Another revealed a rusty but usable metal cup. The hut was not only a shelter, but a carefully crafted environment that anticipated my needs. I began setting up a daily routine. Mornings were for exploration and experiments. Afternoons were for cleaning, arranging, and testing new mechanisms. Evenings were for reflection and rest. I mapped the hut in my mind, memorizing where each hidden compartment, shelf, and lever was located. Slowly, the hut began to feel familiar and safe. My confidence grew with every discovery. For the first time in months, I felt capable of more than just survival. I felt like I could thrive. One day, while examining the ceiling, I noticed faint scratches near the corner where two metal panels met. Curious, I climbed onto a crate and pushed gently on the panels. To my astonishment, a small hatch opened, revealing a shallow compartment above. Inside were more mechanical parts, along with scraps of paper containing crude diagrams and notes. The diagrams suggested sequences for creating devices I had not yet imagined. The hut seemed to be offering guidance, teaching me through trial and error. As the days turned into weeks, I grew stronger both physically and mentally. My muscles were no longer stiff from sleeping on the floor. My hands became calloused from lifting and arranging crates, and my mind sharpened from solving the hut's puzzles. I began to understand cause and effect in ways I never had before. A small misalignment in a gear could prevent an entire mechanism from working. Care, patience, and observation became as essential as food or water. I discovered that some compartments had water stored in hidden jars, released slowly through tiny levers. Others contained tools that could help me repair broken crates or create small devices to improve my living conditions. I realized that whoever had designed this hut had thought about almost everything. It was not magical. It was intelligent in design, anticipating the needs of someone living alone. I began to see myself as a caretaker, someone entrusted with its secrets. One evening, I triggered a mechanism I had not noticed before. A section of the wall shifted, revealing a small cavity with more tools and gears than I had ever seen. Among them was a notebook yellowed with age, filled with sketches of inventions and ideas. It described ways to lift heavy crates using levers, move items silently, and even store water efficiently. I pored over the pages, absorbing every detail. Every discovery made me feel less alone, more capable and more hopeful for the future. By the end of the second week, I had transformed the hut from a dusty, abandoned shell into a functional living space. I had created a small sleeping area, organized my tools in jars, and understood the majority of its mechanisms. I had learned not only how to survive, but how to adapt and improve my environment. Each day brought a new challenge, but the hut provided solutions if I was patient enough to observe and experiment. I had come a long way from the first night I crawled into the dark, dusty hut. What had once seemed like just a shelter had become a teacher, a puzzle, and a companion. My life had changed, not because of luck, but because I had discovered a place that rewarded patience, creativity, and resilience. Homelessness had led me to a hidden world of knowledge and survival skills I never could have imagined. After living in the hut for a few weeks, I felt confident and strong, but something about the hill still called to me. I had explored every corner of the hut, organized my small belongings, and even scavenged the nearby area for anything useful. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I noticed a faint outline on the floor near the back wall, a rectangle that looked like a hidden trapdoor. My heart raced. I had never seen it before, and curiosity pulled me closer. I pressed my hands on the panel, and with a heavy push, it shifted slightly. A thin line of darkness appeared beneath it. I knelt down and carefully cleared the dirt around the edges. The trapdoor was heavier than I expected. I braced my feet and lifted it, revealing a narrow, steep staircase leading downward. A cold draft rose from below, carrying the scent of damp earth and minerals. My stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and fear. This was something entirely new, an underground world waiting for me. I gathered my essentials: a small backpack, my water bottle, a blanket, and a makeshift torch. I didn't know how far the tunnel went, so I needed to be prepared. Holding the torch high, I stepped cautiously down the steps. The walls were made of rough stone, and the air grew cooler as I descended. Every sound echoed my footsteps: the creaking wood under the trap door, and distant drips of water. It felt like entering another world, hidden beneath the hill I thought I had fully explored. The staircase ended at a narrow passageway barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. The tunnel stretched forward in complete darkness, only faintly illuminated by my torch. Small rocks littered the ground, and patches of damp soil made my boots slippery. I moved carefully, testing each step. The walls were cold and slightly wet, and the smell of earth was strong. But I felt alive in a way I hadn't on the surface. Every sense was alert. As I ventured deeper, I noticed strange formations in the walls, patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if someone had carved them long ago. Some were simple grooves, others deep hollows. I wondered if they were natural or left by someone else. I had no answers, but I didn't stop. My curiosity pushed me forward, step by cautious step. Suddenly the passage narrowed, and I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on a low ceiling. Loose rocks tumbled under my boots, and I realized that I would have to move carefully to avoid causing a small collapse. I felt the tension rise in my chest. One wrong step could trap me underground, but I reminded myself that I had survived far worse situations, and I could handle this. After what felt like an hour, I reached a wider chamber. The walls were jagged, and the ceiling rose several meters above me. Stalactites hung like frozen icicles, and the ground was uneven, with small puddles of water and shallow dips. My torchlight flickered against the walls, revealing the faint shimmer of minerals embedded in the stone. It was beautiful and eerie, a hidden world untouched by anyone in years. I explored the chamber carefully, stepping over rocks and puddles. I noticed a faint path leading deeper into the darkness, narrower than the chamber but clearly passable. As I moved forward, I heard the sound of dripping water growing louder. I followed it and soon found a small underground stream, the water clear and cold. I knelt to drink, careful not to disturb the surrounding rocks. The taste of fresh water was invigorating, and I realized I had discovered something vital, a source of survival hidden beneath the hill. Excited but cautious, I explored further along the stream. The tunnel twisted and turned, occasionally opening into tiny alcoves or small chambers. In one alcove, I found the remains of old crates, moss-covered and decayed. I wondered who had been here before me: miners? Explorers? None of it mattered. I felt connected to this hidden world. It was dangerous, yes, but it also offered opportunity. If I could master it, I could survive better than ever. At one point, the tunnel sloped upward, leading to a small ledge overlooking a cavern below. I stood there, torch in hand, and looked down. The cavern was massive, stretching far into darkness. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and the walls glimmered faintly from mineral deposits. My mind raced with possibilities. This underground world could be my secret refuge, a place no one else knew about, full of resources and hidden potential. I began marking my path with small scratches on the walls so I could find my way back. Every step required careful observation. Loose rocks could shift, water could make the path slippery, and the darkness could hide dangers. I realized that survival here wasn't just about strength, it was about attention, caution, and patience. I had to adapt to a new kind of environment, one far different from the streets or even the hut above. Hours passed as I explored, and the cavern led to a series of smaller tunnels branching in different directions. Some were too narrow for me to squeeze through. Others sloped sharply downwards, disappearing into darkness. I decided to pick the safest-looking path, a gentle slope that seemed to lead to another chamber. My torch illuminated faint markings on the walls, lines and symbols that didn't make sense yet. I had no idea what they meant, but they hinted at something intentional, perhaps left by someone who had come here long ago. Eventually, I reached another chamber, this one larger and filled with shallow pools of water. The ceiling arched high above me, and tiny mineral formations sparkled in the torchlight. I felt a surge of excitement and relief. I had found a place with both water and shelter. Hidden entirely from the surface world, it was risky, yes, but the potential was enormous. This underground world could become a second refuge, complementing the hut above. I settled down near a small pool to rest. My heart still raced from the adrenaline of exploration, but I felt alive and focused. The underground world was dangerous, unfamiliar, and mysterious, but it was mine to navigate. I realized that survival wasn't just about hiding or scavenging. It was about discovery, adapting to new environments, and facing challenges that tested my mind and body in ways the surface never had. The cavern I had discovered was vast, but I could feel it had more secrets hidden deeper within. After resting near the small pool, I decided to push further along one of the branching tunnels. This one was darker and narrower, forcing me to move carefully. Loose stones crunched beneath my boots, and the air smelled of damp earth and minerals. I realized I would need patience and caution. A single misstep could send me tumbling down a slope or into a hidden pit. As I moved, I noticed faint carvings on the walls, lines, symbols, and shapes that looked deliberate. Unlike the scratches I had seen earlier, these seemed older, possibly created centuries ago. Some lines formed patterns, and a few symbols resembled arrows or directions. I traced them with my fingers and realized they might serve as a guide. Through the maze of tunnels, I decided to follow them carefully, making small chalk marks to record my path. After climbing a slippery incline, I reached a chamber partially flooded with clear water. I could see small fish swimming in the shallow pools, but I didn't want to disturb them. The water shimmered in my torchlight, reflecting the walls in strange, distorted patterns. I realized this was not just a tunnel, it was a complex ecosystem. I felt awe mixed with caution. Every chamber could hide dangers, sudden drops, unstable rocks, or hidden water currents. Exploring further, I discovered a narrow ledge that ran along a steep drop into darkness. To cross it, I had to hug the wall and move slowly, testing every foothold. My heart raced with every step and sweat poured down my face. The ledge ended at a small alcove containing a pile of rocks, arranged in a peculiar pattern. At first, I thought they were random, but then I noticed they could be lifted or shifted to reveal hidden spaces beneath. I carefully moved them, uncovering a tiny opening leading to a deeper tunnel. The deeper tunnel was narrower still. I had to crawl on hands and knees, scraping against damp stone. The air was cooler here, and my torchlight flickered on the uneven walls. I paused often to listen for sounds, drips of water, echoes of my own breathing, and the faint movement of loose stones. This environment demanded complete focus. I realized survival here wasn't just about strength. It was about awareness, patience, and thinking several steps ahead. Eventually, I emerged into a chamber filled with crystalline formations embedded in the walls. They glowed faintly in the torchlight, reflecting rainbow colors across the ceiling. In the center, a shallow pool collected water from the ceiling, forming a natural basin. I knelt to drink and noticed small carvings around the pool. They seemed to form a pattern, almost like instructions or a map. I traced them carefully, realizing they could indicate a way to navigate to the next part of the cavern safely. While examining the carvings, I accidentally disturbed a loose stone. It shifted slightly and the floor trembled. A small section of the cavern collapsed with a muffled crash. My heart raced, but I was far enough away to remain safe. This incident reminded me that the underground world was alive in its own way, unstable and unpredictable. I needed to be careful, but I also felt exhilarated. The risk made every discovery more meaningful. Using the carvings as a guide, I ventured deeper. The tunnels twisted and branched endlessly, some ending in dead ends, others dropping sharply into darkness. I came across a narrow waterfall feeding into a hidden pool. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and I had to carefully navigate slippery rocks to avoid falling. Once across, I discovered a natural alcove that could serve as a temporary camp. I cleared some debris, arranged my blanket, and stored water in small containers I had carried. It wasn't a permanent home like the hut, but it was safe for the night. Over the next few days, I explored more tunnels, mapping their twists and turns with makeshift markings. I found natural resources, pools of clean water, edible plants growing in shaded alcoves, and small pockets of dry space that could serve as storage. Every new discovery taught me lessons about patience, observation, and adaptation. The underground world was a test of my creativity and survival instincts. By the end of this section, I realized that the cavern system had transformed me. I was no longer just a person surviving day by day. I had become resourceful, observant, and mentally agile. I had learned to move quietly, plan carefully, and respect the dangers around me. The underground tunnels were more than a secret. They had become a second home, a place that challenged me and taught me skills I could never have learned on the surface. For weeks, the hill and the hut had been my safe haven. I had mastered its hidden corners, explored the tunnels beneath, and learned how to survive alone. But one morning, the wind arrived differently. It wasn't the gentle breeze I had grown used to. It was sharp, cold, and carried an unfamiliar scent of rain and wet earth. I climbed to the top of the hill to survey the horizon. The sky was a swirl of gray and deep violet, thick clouds rolling in with alarming speed. Something told me this was no ordinary storm. I hurried back to the hut, scanning the area for anything loose that could blow away. Crates, blankets, and my few supplies had to be secured. My hands shook slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline. Nature was unpredictable, and I had learned that underestimating it could be fatal. I tied crates together with rope, stacked heavier objects against the walls, and reinforced the door with fallen branches I found nearby. The first drops of rain fell like tiny pebbles against the metal roof, and within minutes the drizzle became a torrential downpour. The wind howled against the hill, rattling the hut violently. I crouched inside, gripping a wooden beam that ran along the floor. The sound of the storm was deafening. Every instinct screamed that I needed more than just a roof over my head. I needed a plan to survive what could be hours, maybe days of relentless weather. I remembered the underground tunnels I had explored weeks before. They were stable, dry, and shielded from the storm. If the water on the surface rose too high, the hut might flood, or the soil around the hill might collapse. Without hesitation, I grabbed my backpack, filled with water, blankets, and basic supplies, and made my way to the trapdoor. The rain pounded on my back as I climbed down into the darkness, the air cooler and smelling of wet stone. Here I was safe from wind and rain, but the real danger was the uncertainty of what the storm might do to the hill above. In the underground cavern, the sound of the storm above was muffled, but the vibrations ran through the stone floor. I moved cautiously, tracing the tunnels I had mapped before. Water dripped from the ceiling in steady streams, and in some areas I noticed the walls were slicker than usual. It reminded me that even this place, which had once felt perfectly safe, now had hazards I hadn't considered. I had to move slowly, testing every step and keeping an eye on the ceiling for loose rocks. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Lightning illuminated cracks in the hill above through faint openings, and thunder shook the earth beneath me. I found a wider chamber and made it my temporary refuge, stacking rocks around the entrance to prevent water from flowing in. I set down my supplies and started thinking about how to survive not just the storm, but what might happen afterward. I realized that storms often change the terrain. Landslides could block my exit, tunnels could collapse, and the hut could be damaged beyond recognition. I decided to explore a deeper branch of the tunnels I hadn't visited before. It was risky. I hadn't mapped this area thoroughly, but I needed to find a secure space that could serve as a safe haven no matter what. Crawling through narrow passages, I noticed small fissures in the walls where water seeped in. The tunnels were alive with moisture, and each drip echoed like a warning. I used a flat rock to test the ground ahead before stepping, making sure it wouldn't give way under my weight. Finally, I reached a chamber that was larger than any I had seen before. The ceiling arched high above, and a natural basin collected water dripping from the walls. This pool would provide clean water if needed, and the space was large enough for me to move freely. I cleared away debris, placing rocks in a circle to form a makeshift barrier, and then settled down to observe the storm above. I could feel the hut trembling with every gust of wind, and the thought of returning up there made me realize how fragile my earlier refuge had been. As night fell, the storm's fury only increased. Rainwater began pouring down small crevices above, forming tiny streams that cut across the cavern floor. I improvised channels using rocks and branches to divert water away from my resting area. Each movement had to be precise. One wrong shift could flood the chamber or send a rock sliding toward me. I worked steadily, focusing on the details. The storm tested more than my strength, it tested my patience, focus, and problem-solving skills. Hours later, the rain slowed, leaving the air damp and heavy with the smell of wet stone. I climbed a small ledge to observe another branch of the cavern, noting cracks in the walls that might need monitoring. The storm had changed things. Some paths were blocked by fallen rocks, and I realized I would need to adapt quickly if I wanted to continue exploring or return to the surface safely. Survival wasn't just about shelter. It was about anticipating changes and acting before danger struck. By the next morning, the storm had passed, but its aftermath was clear. Mudslides had altered the hill's slope. Debris covered parts of the surface, and small landslides had left the hut slightly tilted. I stayed in the cavern, observing the damage from below, making plans for repairing the hut and reinforcing the surrounding soil. I knew I could rebuild, but I also understood that relying solely on the hut above was no longer enough. The underground tunnels had become my primary sanctuary, a safe place where I could survive extreme conditions. In the days that followed, I set routines for checking water flow, securing weak tunnels, and monitoring any structural changes caused by the storm. Each discovery, each challenge, pushed me further in understanding the balance between preparation, observation, and adaptability. I realized that survival wasn't just about having shelter. It was about learning from the environment, adapting to new threats, and planning for situations I couldn't fully predict. The storm had been a harsh teacher. It showed me my vulnerabilities, tested my instincts, and forced me to innovate. I strengthened my tools, marked safe routes, and created contingency plans. By the end of the week, I felt stronger, smarter, and more capable than ever. The hill and the hut were no longer just places to live, they were tests, challenges, and teachers all at once. I had survived the storm, but more importantly, I had learned that true survival came from foresight, creativity, and courage in the face of the unknown. The storm had passed, but its aftermath left the hill more dangerous than ever. Loose soil had carved small gullies down the slope, and large stones now blocked the main path to the hut. The metal roof was dented in places, and I could see that some of the walls had shifted slightly. Climbing up to check the damage would be risky. I paused at the entrance of the underground chamber, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Survival now meant strategy, not just strength. I decided to scout the area carefully before returning to the hut. Using a long branch as a probe, I tested the slope above the tunnels, feeling for unstable soil. Each step was deliberate. One wrong move could send me sliding down the hill or trigger a small landslide. My heart pounded with every cautious step. The sky had cleared, but the soil was still slick, and loose rocks threatened to roll underfoot. I realized that my old routine of casually moving between the hut and the tunnels would no longer work. While surveying, I noticed movement near the edge of the hill. At first, I thought it was just shadows, but then I saw figures approaching. A group of people had found their way here, probably scavengers searching for shelter or resources. Panic surged through me. I had never encountered anyone in this remote area. They could be dangerous, and my only advantage was that I knew the tunnels and terrain better than anyone. I ducked behind a large rock, analyzing their movements. They didn't see me, but I could hear their voices, crude and loud, echoing in the hollow spaces between rocks. I needed a plan. Running straight through the exposed hill would be suicidal. The tunnels were my safest bet. But I couldn't just hide. I had to protect my home and supplies. I quickly gathered what I could carry: blankets, food, water, and a few makeshift tools. Then I moved silently through a narrow passage I had used before. My heart beat fast, but my mind was calm, calculating. I remembered every curve and branch of the tunnels. If I could lure them into the wrong paths, I might be able to secure both myself and the hut. As I descended into the deeper tunnel, I heard the scavengers moving above. Their shouts grew louder, and I realized they were exploring the hill methodically. I used small rocks to make subtle noise in distant tunnels, drawing them away from my path. They fell for it, chasing echoes. While I navigated deeper, using the knowledge I had gained from weeks of underground exploration, each step required careful attention. One wrong move and I could reveal my position. After a while, I reached a chamber I'd never fully explored. It had a natural alcove I could use as a vantage point. From here, I could see several tunnel entrances branching out in different directions. I considered my options. The scavengers were above, unaware of the hidden passages. I could wait, or I could create a diversion. I chose the diversion. Using a pile of stones and some dry leaves, I triggered a small collapse in one tunnel, causing dust and noise to rise toward the surface. The scavengers reacted immediately, running to investigate, giving me more time. I moved quickly, checking the tunnels for structural weaknesses. The storm had left some rocks precariously balanced, and I used them to my advantage. I dislodged a few strategically, creating small blockages in paths the intruders might take. The scavengers were now disoriented, shouting in frustration. I realized that with careful manipulation of the terrain, I could channel them away from both the hut and my supplies. After several tense hours, I waited until the scavengers had left the hill. Their voices faded into the distance, leaving silence in their wake. I climbed carefully back toward the hut, noticing the storm damage more closely. I reinforced weak spots, dug shallow trenches to divert rainwater, and secured the remaining supplies. The hut had survived barely, but I had survived the human threat using wit and careful planning. That night I sat on the hut's floor, exhausted but victorious. I realized that survival wasn't about fear, it was about adaptability, observation, and ingenuity. The storm had tested my physical limits, the tunnels had trained my mind, and the scavengers had taught me strategy under pressure. Every lesson from the past weeks came together, making me more confident and self-reliant than ever before. In the days that followed, I continued to improve my environment. I built small barriers around the hill, reinforced sections of the hut, and mapped escape routes in case of future threats. I collected rainwater safely, monitored soil stability, and explored more branches of the tunnels for hidden resources. My understanding of the hill, the hut, and the underground system had grown deeper than I could have imagined. Then, one evening, as I sat near a small fire in the hut, I noticed a faint glow from one of the deeper tunnels. Curious, I ventured carefully toward it. In a hidden chamber, I found an underground spring that fed into a crystal-clear pool. The water shimmered in the torchlight, untouched and pristine. It was a hidden treasure, a source of life I could rely on. The discovery felt like a reward for all the challenges I had endured. For the first time, I realized that being homeless at 22 had led me to a place that tested me, taught me, and ultimately saved me. The hut, the tunnels, the storm, and even the threat of scavengers had forced me to grow. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, capable of facing dangers I could never have imagined weeks before. I sat by the pool for a long time, reflecting. The world outside could be harsh and unpredictable, but I had discovered resilience within myself. Every challenge, every problem, every moment of fear had been an opportunity to learn, adapt, and improve. I had unearthed more than just a hut under a hill. I had unearthed strength and the ability to survive against all odds.